All right, well, seeing as it is just a minute after the top of the hour, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, where we are going to visualize retirement. My name is Sarah Krapek, and I'm the Director of Participant Education for Strategic Retirement Partners. I will be your moderator today, and before we get started, I just wanted to go over a few items so that you know how to best participate in the event. All the lines are muted during the call, but we will welcome your questions via the chat feature that you see on your screen. I would encourage you to send me any questions that you have during the session. I will monitor those, and then we will visit those at the end after Stuart's presentation. Should you have any technical issues, please feel free to use that feature to also send me a message, and I'll monitor and address those as best I can. And now I am pleased to introduce Stuart Ritter, who is our presenter for today. Stuart is the Retirement Insights Leader for T. Rowe Price U.S. Intermediaries. He helps develop the firm's expertise on major topics that impact the retirement industry and thus all of us. Stuart is a frequent speaker at client and industry events as a retirement subject matter expert, and also serves as the company spokesperson to national media organizations. Now, as a certified financial planner, he is certainly qualified to speak to us about the retirement numbers, but I am so excited that he is boldly taking the conversation in a new direction and discussing the non-financial aspects of preparing for retirement with us today. As most of you are joining from a computer and have access to the internet, I did want to mention that we are going to be walking through a tool that T. Rowe Price has developed regarding the Visualize Retirement Workshop. That tool can be found at troweprice.com/vision workbook. So whether it's now during the session or as a follow-up, something that you'd like to take offline, we'd encourage you to access the workbook as a tool for yourself. Again, it can be found at troweprice.com/vision workbook. So with that introduction, Stuart, feel free to take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. I appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for taking some time out of your day to spend some time visualizing your own retirement. As Sarah pointed out, when we've done research, one of the things that we've found is about 3 out of 4 pre-retirees have made a serious effort to plan for the financial aspects of retirement. They've thought about their balance. They've thought about what Social Security might provide. They've thought about what their initial withdrawal amount might be, and all those certified financial planner numbers that we kick around. But one of the things we found was interesting and led us to develop the program you're about to see is that only about 1 out of 3 people have thought about the emotional aspects of retirement. And retirement has both of those elements to it. It has the financial. You certainly need the money foundation in order to be able to do the things that you want to do. But it also has the emotional side of it, those things that you want to do and who you're going to be. And when we discovered that a lot of people hadn't thought about it, and we dove into that a little bit and realized that a lot of people weren't quite sure what they were supposed to be thinking about, that helped us realize that we had an opportunity to educate folks on something that was pretty important to them, but they weren't sure what to do. And it's akin to any life change. When you got done with school and went out into the working world, when you, if you got married or had kids, along those levels, people realize this is a major life inflection point, and we wanted to help people prepare for it. So, as Sarah pointed out, we've got a workbook, troweprice.com/vision workbook, VISION. WORKBOOK. As she said, if you're sitting at a computer, feel free to go there now, bring it up on your screen or download it. It's a PDF, and you can print it out and fill it out on paper. You can fill it out on a screen. You can get to it later and do it. I'll be describing the questions in enough detail that if you're not able to get to it right now, you can still follow along and hopefully get out of the experience here what we'd like you to. And best of all, I will be asking Sarah questions about her vision of retirement. And you'll be able to hear how one person might answer it, and that will often help you think about the kinds of answers you might give. So let me do a bit of a preamble to kind of set up what visualizing retirement is, and then we'll get into the details of what your vision might be. So when we asked folks what having a vision meant, 50% of people said working with their spouse or partner to define what that would be. Now, it's at 50% because that was everybody, including single folks. But one of the things that's really important if you do have somebody else helping you make your retirement decisions is to have both of you think about your visions for retirement. So if you are on that website, download 2 copies and have your spouse or partner fill out one as well. And it will be an interesting conversation if you've done this separately to then bring those answers together. A bunch of people said retirement vision means creating a picture of what your retirement lifestyle could be. And it also includes healthcare and purpose. And I'll get into each of those in a little bit of detail, and then we'll talk about the specifics. Now, creating a vision can create clarity for you. As I mentioned, like any other life change, people aren't quite sure what to expect. So one of the things that we've heard is valuable about the exercise we're all going to go through is it gives you some very specific areas to think about. So it's not just close your eyes and visualize retirement, which is a wonderful exercise to start with, but it gets into some specific areas that are detailed for you, and that'll help you establish a framework and put you in a position where you can work with others towards that vision, because just about everybody's vision includes some kind of interaction with other people. So before I get into the details, I do want to pause, bring Sarah back into the conversation, and Sarah, ask you, if you were to close your eyes for a couple of seconds and visualize your retirement, talk to us a little bit about what that picture is.
Well, thanks, Stuart. I did know that you were going to ask me this ahead of time, so I had a chance to talk about it. And thinking about retirement is fun. I think we can all agree on that. But I found that it was not necessarily a specific place or, a dollar amount or, feet in the sand, so to speak, that I thought of. It was more a state of mind. Just being able to do whatever the day called for and have complete discretion over my time. Right now it's work and kids and school activities and, I would say a very small percentage of my time is doing exactly maybe what I want to do, exactly when. So having that flexibility and that discretion is what I think of when I think of retirement.
That sounds good to me, and that's a common answer. It's more about control than necessarily the next step is, okay, now that I get to decide, what do I want it to be? It's more going, okay, I get to decide, and that is part of the transition. So let's get into some details. So when you are in a position, and when I say you, I'm now using the collective you, when you are in a position to decide what you want to do with your time, let's go through what we've determined are the key components for you to consider. And if there are any journalism majors on the call here, this should look familiar. It's helpful to frame your retirement vision in terms of who, what, where, when, and why. And I'll go through each of these and, again, make reference to the workbook, but if you don't have the workbook, the questions should prompt some thinking anyway, and you can get to it later. So that first one is who. And it's a pretty obvious one. Who are the people that you are going to spend time with in retirement? And here's why that's important. Not only does it help you mentally, but it helps you physically. People who are socially engaged, who are spending time with other folks, have a lower risk of cognitive decline and dementia, and there's a strong correlation between social interaction and health. And social isolation having a negative effect for older adults, and therefore having social interaction, when you do have that, has a positive influence on both your mind and your body. Now, one of the things that we know about adult learning theory is that adults process new information by comparing it to older information. So I want to start with the older information, and that is the question, who do you spend the most time with today? So for those of you who have the workbook in front of you, you will see that question number 1 asks you to rank in order who you spend the most time with today. And the choices are family and household, friends, work, social group, neighbors and community and volunteering, and then for all of these we have an other category. So take a second and think about who you spend the most time with today. The second question then, not surprisingly, is when you get to retirement, who are you going to spend the most time with in retirement? So it's the same choices generally, but let's see if the order changes. All right, most folks take that work colleague group, and that drops way down to the bottom, and other groups rise to the top. For example, 57% of folks said, hey, I'm going to spend more time with family and friends. Now, we didn't survey the family and friends to see if they want to spend more time with you. That's a completely separate issue, but at least it gives you an opportunity to start out with a recognition that who you're spending your time with today will change in retirement and can be helpful to be proactive, thinking about who those people are going to be. Now, there's a particular subset of this that I want to spend a little bit of time on, and that's the next question, which has to do with wellness, health care. The first question is, who will be on your wellness support team in retirement? When you get to the point where you're going to need some help with health care, who do you want that to be helping you? And then let me flip that coin over. Whose wellness support team do you anticipate being on when you get to retirement? So the clear example here is folks with aging parents who you might be providing some help with today. When you get to retirement, do you anticipate continuing to be in that role? And then lastly, once you've thought through who you want to spend time with, who you hope is going to be helping you, who you might be helping in terms of wellness later on, what are some things you can do today in order to put that in place? I made a joke about whether or not your family and friends want to spend more time with you, but for some folks, that's a serious consideration. And thinking about what you might do now and steps you can take as you move into retirement to either move closer to family, to start making connections to community organizations. What are some things you can do today to help make the vision more of a reality when you make the transition? All right, let's go on to the second one, which is what? And since we have 45 minutes for our session today, I'm going to be going through each of these with a little bit of time, but certainly many of you are going to want to take more time offline to think about these in more detail and take that opportunity. Again, talk with whoever else might be in your household, give them the opportunity, and that can put some structure in place to help you with the transition. The second one up here is what? What activities are you going to engage in during retirement? And we follow the same format here. I'll share with you what other folks have said. 70% want to travel. That's a common one. I pointed out the 57% wanting to spend more time with family and friends. 50% want to pursue hobbies. And 30% want to work. 30% want to work. Hang on, I got to check that last word there. Work. 30% have a vision of working in retirement. Retirement used to be you worked full-time on Friday and never did it again starting on Monday. And now 1 out of 3 people have work as part of their vision of retirement. It's a pretty common aspect of the vision, certainly in the early part of retirement. So recognize that that's something other folks are interested in doing. So if it's part of your vision, you're not alone. Let me go straight to the question, how do you spend your time today? So think about where you spend most of your time and where you spend relatively little time. And again, if you've got the workbook in front of you, work, leisure and fun activities, physical activities, and so forth. And just like we did last time, what do you want to have different in retirement? Where will you spend more of your time and where will you spend less? Now, this may seem kind of obvious, but we did some focus groups recently, and we were talking to retirees, and we were talking about this, and one guy started laughing. He said, you know, I wish I'd had this before I retired. And the moderator said, well, why is that? He said, well, I kept my what list the same. So I did retire on Friday. And Monday morning, I slept a little late, but I got up, put on my dress clothes, and showed up at the office so I could go to lunch with everybody. And they're all looking at me like, why are you here? I hadn't thought through the what. So hopefully you'll get a better idea of what you want to do with your time in retirement. And then the next question is focused more on specific activities that you want to pursue to have a vibrant retirement. And same here, what are the steps you can take today to lay the foundation to allow you to engage in those activities when you get to retirement? The third of our W's is where. Where do you want to live and where do you want to visit in retirement? So again, let me share what folks have told us. Top criteria when deciding where to live in retirement: affordable cost of living, good weather, nearby family and friends. Now, if I can extrapolate a little bit from what Sarah said earlier, criteria for where you live right now might be different. School system, for example, might have been one of the big drivers about where you live today, and that's not on the list. And as a matter of fact, let me bring Sarah back in again. We've talked about who, we've talked about what, I've brought up where. Sarah, can you share a little bit about how your thoughts about retirement have altered between what you do now and what it might be in retirement, especially for who and for what?
Yeah, absolutely, Stuart. I clearly have a work community that I spend a considerable amount of time with now. I anticipate that changing. And I consider friends rising up in that list. Of course, family is a priority now, and it will be then as well, but I hope to see more time in the future to spend with friendships. I also see volunteer commitments being able to rise to the top of that list too. And grandchildren as well, people that aren't even born yet, I hope will play a significant role at that time in my life. So that's a little bit about the people.
That's great. And those kinds of things, when we start connecting this to the financial side, have important implications. Someone who says, hey, what I want to do is get the heck out of the country and travel the world for a very long time, that has a different financial implication from someone who says, I want to spend time near home with the grandkids. So one of the benefits of thinking through what your vision for retirement is then feeds back into the financial side of it and can help people feel more confident that they're putting a plan together on both sides that work with each other and complement well. Talk a little bit about the what. You mentioned the who. What do you want to do in retirement in addition to spending time with the grandkids?
Yeah. Well, I certainly hope that travel, seeing new places, is a part of what I do on a day-to-day basis. Um, Living a very active lifestyle is important to me. So whether it's something that I do near where I live or make more of an adventure of it through those travels, being active and thus healthy will be very important to me. So making sure that those two things, that activity and health, are going hand in hand is definitely going to be a priority and is already on my radar.
That's great. And that helps show how these 5 W's link together.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the what is being active, then that can play into things like where, good weather.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about the factors that are important to you in deciding where to live in retirement, that will help you put it together. So for those of you on the call, take a minute at this point, and when you think about where you want to live in retirement, what are the factors that are going to affect the where? And let's drill down on the place you will spend most of your time, which is your primary home in retirement. What are the characteristics that are most important to you? And again, we've got a number listed on the workbook, and you can just shoot down that list, and you'll notice that some of them have to do with the home itself, the physical structure, and some of it have to do with the community. And lastly, what are the steps you can take today? And we don't have it explicitly listed here, but the where can include where you want to travel. So what would that be? If you're interested in buying a second home, what might that look like? Or if you want to stay where you are, what can you do to prepare for life in retirement? When, the 4th W. And this is my favorite one. And the reason it's my favorite one is because it doesn't get a lot of love. People look at the 5 W's, look at the other 4 and go, yeah, I can see why those are important. And then look at the when and go, that's easy. And when can be a lot more complex than people realize. A lot of folks just go into it and say, oh, when, that's going to be a particular age. And yet, in addition to reaching a certain age, when we asked folks what is going to be driving your expected retirement, there are a whole bunch of other answers up here. Wanting to stop working, feeling personally ready, reaching a certain asset level. And may I point out that the first time a financial driver of retirement comes in is when it's tied for 4th with wanting to do other things. And then there's eligibility for Social Security, Medicare, et cetera on here. So there are a lot of things that drive the when people are expecting to retire. But as I talked about earlier, not everybody thinks about stopping working all at once. As a matter of fact, only 30% say, that's it. Now, I realize this contrasts a little bit with the 30% who explicitly said, I want to work in retirement. But this slide gets at the fact that the definition of retirement has completely changed. There's retiring but continuing to work part-time but not in my current job, or maybe I stay in my current job and I reduce the hours, or I work part-time there, or I cycle between working full-time and working part-time and not working at all and going back in. There are a lot of options that we have. Again, it makes the when question a lot more interesting. And then there's the other person in your household. If you have a spouse or partner, what does the timing look for each of you? Are you both going to retire at the same time? Will one of you step back from full-time and go to part-time? And what are the consequences of that decision? Again, we were doing some focus groups, and there was a woman in there who said, so our original plan was my husband retired, I'm significantly younger than he is, and I was going to keep working. And I got to tell you, that lasted about 3 years before the fact that I resented the fact that he could stay home and I still had to get up every day and go to work was influencing our relationship enough that I decided we've got to come up with some other solution, because this is having an effect on our relationship in a way I didn't think about. So both you're going through this process as well as having a spouse or partner go through it and then comparing answers and being flexible when you actually execute on the plan can help both of you with that transition. So again, if you look in your workbook, if you have that in front of you, think a little bit about what are going to be your drivers for when you retire, an age, an asset level. What would that time frame look like? And then what is driving the answers you gave on that question? Because understanding what is influencing us can help. Is it just, well, retirement's supposed to be 65, so I've picked an age, or is it something else? All right, what can you do now to retire on time? For some people, this is the first time they may have sat down and said, okay, it's at this time or at this asset level or with this coordination with my spouse, and that helps you, again, link it back to the financial stuff. Have I been saving enough money? Do I need to save more? Do I need to invest it differently? This is where organizations and professionals like your employer, like Strategic Retirement Partners, can help you think through this and make sure that you've got a plan in place so that you can make happen the things that you want to have happen to get to the when. And lastly, why? Not why do you want to retire? We've covered all that. The why is, who are you going to be in retirement? And it's important, and I alluded to this earlier, because folks with a greater purpose are more likely to remain free of Alzheimer's, less likely to develop disabilities or die young, less likely to have cognitive impairments. I mean, this part really matters. We had a retiree tell us when we were talking about this, he looked at us and said, you know what, I failed retirement. And that was the first time I had heard anybody ascribe the word fail to retirement. As Sarah pointed out, retirement is positive and filled with visions of control and maybe grandkids and beaches and travel and all those kinds of things. He said, here's what it was. I got to the number. I got the financial side done. And I retired. And I failed. I mean, I was bored. I was unhappy. I started bickering with my spouse. I didn't know why I should get out of bed in the morning. I think I was depressed. I failed retirement. I went back to work just to solve that problem. And he recognized that what was missing as he made that transition was the why. I've got a 13-year-old son who plays soccer, and his coach is the coach of a local high school team. And Coach was coming onto the field of practice one day, and I said, hey, Coach, you're looking kind of glum. What's wrong? He said, well, I called everybody who made the high school soccer team and told them they made the team. And I looked at him and said, okay, that sounds like good news. Why the long face? And he said, well, that was last night. Tonight, I got to call everybody who didn't make the team and tell somebody who's been a soccer player most of their life, who gets their structure and their identity and their social interactions from this sport, and say, you know what, it's over. It's done. You're going to have to transition to something else. And that's a really hard message for a couple of kids to hear. And I realize that's a really hard message for people who are transitioning into retirement to hear. Your work very often provides you with fulfillment, with meaning. And when you get to retirement, it's important to think ahead of time about what's going to replace that. And that's what the set of questions in the why section are all about. And hopefully lead you to the steps you can take today to make sure that you are not just retiring from something, but retiring to something, and put in place some concrete aspects of what that to is. So here are the 5 W's of your retirement vision: who, what, where, when, and why. And the workbook that we put together TROprice.com/vision workbook, is designed to help you get into details in each of those areas, to help you get some clarity, to bring others into the conversation. And although I've mentioned spouse and partner throughout this presentation, it's at this point that I want to say that it's also important sometimes to bring in other family members, to bring in other friends, so that they have clarity on what you're thinking, and you can share with them and maybe reconcile any distinctions between what their thoughts were and what your thoughts are. So, continue to refine your vision. And it's not a one-time thing, and it's not just before you retire. We have people bring these workbooks out as they go through retirement and think about how they've changed and what might need to change about their vision. Talk with your spouse, talk with your partner, talk with your family about it on an ongoing basis, and work with your support team, not just wellness support, but if you've got an advisor involved, if you've got materials available from your employer, recognize that there are a lot of people who can support you on this journey, us included, hopefully with this workbook, and that gives you an opportunity to bring some clarity to your vision for retirement and make sure that you have the opportunity to marry the financial and the emotional to give you the confidence you need to make that transition. So, got some information on here related to this presentation and the materials that we've shared. What I want to do at this point is go back to Sarah, who's been looking at the questions that you've been submitting throughout this presentation, and ask her to share what some of those questions are, and I'll do my best to bring more details in for the kinds of things you want to hear about. Sarah?
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Stuart. I was jotting some notes myself, and I just love the expression or the phrasing that you said. We all need to think about retiring not just from something, but retiring to something. And I love the way that that can shift our focus and really help us be more forward thinking into this life stage that hopefully will be a long and healthy one for most of us. So that's great. There are a few questions coming in around the asset level, right? Because you had posed the question to us, potentially at what age or asset level do you want to aim to retire at? Do you have any general guidelines for us when it comes to the numbers as to what we might want to be shooting for?
Sure. You have probably heard about some of the guidelines that financial planners talk about. So I'm going to start with those guidelines, and then each individual can adjust based on their own situation. So what you've often heard about is to help you think about what your big pile of money when you get to retirement might actually generate in terms of income. Many of you have probably heard about the 4% guideline, and the 4% guideline is strictly a communications device. I mean, it used to be people would go down to personnel, because it was called personnel, and personnel would say, hey, your defined benefit plan is going to send you a check for $40,000 a year. You go home to your spouse and say, honey, we need to make it on $40,000 a year. And then we switched to 401k plans, defined contribution plans. And now you go down to human resources, because it's called human resources, and they say you have $1 million in your account. And you go home to your spouse and say, honey, we have $1 million. We're rich. It's more money than we've ever had. It'll never run out. And recognizing that sometimes that's the reaction people have, the 4% guideline was simply designed to help people recognize that that pile of $1 million, well, if you multiply it by 4%, you can think about it as the same $40,000, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. So the 4% guideline is designed to say, okay, multiply that by your big balance. Think about that as the income you might get. And that's when I can pause and look back at you and say, is that enough? Is that plus Social Security, plus a DB benefit if you have one, maybe you're still working for a while and getting some earnings, is that enough to fund the lifestyle that you've decided is part of your vision? And if it's not, maybe you need to save a little more. Maybe you need to work a little longer. If it is, then you might be in a position where you've hit that asset level. Another way to think about it is if you have between about 10 and 12 times your current salary, the math works out so that also is a way to think about a benchmark for whether or not you have enough money to retire. So either 10 to 12 times your current salary, or multiply 4% times what you have, and then adjust from there based on your particular circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Those are some good general guidelines for us. Thank you, Stuart. I got a question from a younger participant who's joining us today, around 25 years old, who asks, when do you recommend getting a financial advisor?
Okay, first of all, I am incredibly impressed that 25-year-old is thinking about retirement.
Mm-hmm.
You are a planner, I can tell. Second, the time to get a professional involved depends on the level of complexity. Let me use a silly analogy. If I cut my finger, I'm okay with putting a Band-Aid on it. But if my appendix needs to come out, I'd really like a professional involved. If I'm just handling my checking and savings account and putting a budget together, for some people, they can handle that on their own. When it gets to things being complex, there's more money coming in, so you've moved from being a net spender to a net saver. You've got to make some investment decisions, or even if you're struggling to put a budget together and just trying to decide what your priorities should be and where you should be putting your money, if that's reached a level of complexity where you've decided, I'm probably not in a position to handle that on my own, that's when you get a professional involved. So some folks it's earlier, for some folks it's later. Generally it's when you feel like I've got more questions than I have answers, and I want somebody who's done this before to help me out. That's probably the time to do it.
Mm-hmm. Great. And what we all wouldn't give on the call, right, to be 22 or 25 years old and just diving into this retirement journey, because that, I want to remind everyone, is the time when you can make the most impact, when your savings decisions are, you know, the most important, because you have so much time for that money to go to work for you. And I can't tell you the number of times I've sat down with someone in their mid 50s who said, boy, what I wouldn't give to give my 25-year-old self a pep talk. So we're just thrilled to get those types of participants joining us, and just want to encourage you early to make some of those important decisions to save for your retirement. So I think that brings us to the end of the majority of questions, and it's certainly creeping up on the time that we had set aside for today's session. So with that, I did want to point people back toward the tool that Stuart has been referring to during our session today. There is a free workbook that goes along with the Visualize Retirement workshop. And that is something that we want you to access online at troprice.com/vision workbook. You can download it, you can print it. We encourage you to take it home. If you're planning with someone other than yourself, we would encourage you to sit down and make the time to go through that, because the earlier you get these conversations started, the better. And I also just really want to give a heartfelt thanks to Stuart for being here today. We appreciate your insights. I, in particular, appreciate a conversation about retirement that doesn't necessarily have to do with a calculator or a tool or a chart or a graph, but the things that can truly help ground us, give us some vision, help us with that purpose, and plan out the who, what, where, when, and why. So thank you so much, Stuart.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and then a final housekeeping item is that a recording of today's session will be emailed out to everyone who registered. The recording goes through our compliance department, and then we'll wrap it up in an email and get it out to you all, hopefully by the end of this week. So stay tuned for that. And also, you won't want to miss our upcoming webinars in the 2020 series. And the next session is scheduled for May 12th, where SRP's very own Zach Morris will be discussing the challenges as well as some tips for saving for both college and retirement at the same time. So those of us who have little ones, but also are trying to save for retirement may be particularly interested in that call, and invitations for that will be sent out in April. So please stay tuned for that. We would love to have you join us. So if we didn't happen to get to a question that you may have just sent through the chat, you can expect a personal follow-up from me here in the next couple hours or the next day or so. I would be happy to get to you. And with that, just once again, want to thank everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you again next time. Thanks so much.